Hello, everybody. Andy Jacob here with the DotCom Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series. I have a great show today. I had a chance recently to jump on a phone call with this particular entrepreneur. We had such a wonderful time on the phone talking about her career and what she's doing for so many international nurses throughout the world. I wanted to bring her on the show because she's really carved out an amazing niche with her business. The name of the business, of course, is One Call Staffing, and she's very well known in the international nursing industry. And her name, of course, is Angelique Barniak. And Angelique is just a power of energy. She's a pep in the step for people, and she's got such a great outlook on what she does with what I'm calling candidate matchmaking. So Angelique, I want to get right to it. Welcome to the DotCom Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series today.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. We had such a great phone call. I wanted to get you on the show. Let's pull the lens back because I have so many questions to 30,000 feet. Tell us what you do at One Call Staffing, and then we're going to get into it.
So basically, in a very abbreviated version, clients, primarily hospitals, reach out to us with specific needs to address shortages in nursing. They'll define for us the clinical areas that they're seeking. My job is to identify potential candidates globally, assess their skills, their English, make sure that they've passed the US RN licensing exam. We take them through the immigration process for their green card, the relocation process, whatever certifications might be required by the specific state they'll be practicing in, get them over here, get them in their housing in many instances, and off to work they go.
I love it. You do such a great job. And over the past couple of years, certainly through the pandemic, there's been somewhat of a destabilization, I would call, of staffing patterns. And you come in and you really help stabilize healthcare providers, hospitals with recruitment of highly qualified staff. Let's talk about that and how you do it.
Yeah. So the staff, they must have clinical experience. This is not a model for a brand new overseas graduate. And yes, the goal is to stabilize the staffing patterns over the long term, because the process itself, under the best of circumstances, from the day that the petition is filed by the sponsoring employer to the time that they arrive, could be anywhere from 12, 18 to 24 months. So when you're filing for people annually, a couple times a year, you're building a long-term pipeline that you're going to be able to draw on. Once the candidate, I have identified the candidate, I have spoken with them, I have assessed them clinically, language-wise, and most importantly, I feel, what are their long-term goals? Are they interested in furthering their education? Are they the kind of nurse that is patient care centered? Are they the type of nurse that is education focused? They like to be teaching the family of the patients, the new hires, precepting. Do they want to become clinical nurse specialists? Are they happy just staying at the bedside? What is their clinical background and their passion? Because a lot of nurses, especially overseas, hospitals float nurses through different clinical areas on a regular basis. That doesn't mean that you love every clinical area you are working in. So my job is to hone in on what is it that the nurse is looking for? What are her needs or his needs with regard to family? If they have children and a spouse, what do they do for a living? I want to be able to place them so that both individuals can grow financially, professionally, so that the kids are going to school in a good school district, and that the hospital at which they will be working can support and nurture them through that long term. Because although there is a defined commitment that the nurse must give to their sponsoring employer, I'm not looking for a nurse that wants to only do their time for their 24 or 30 months. We want longevity. We want people that we will remain with that organization for a very long time, become part of the succession planning model. These are our future teachers, leaders, because most of us, if you're in my age group, we're getting old. We want to retire. So we have to pass the baton, and we want to be able to pass the baton to the right individual. It's also very expensive for a hospital they make a huge investment in a nurse. The fact is, whether they're from overseas or from within the US, to onboard a nurse and train them, the numbers are out there, and they're high, $50,000 to $80,000 in year one. So 2 years is really, in my opinion, not the best return on your investment. And that's where the screening process comes in. I have to do my due diligence. Why would I place a nurse or present her to a client in Connecticut or New York when I know that the rest of the family or most of the family is already settled in Florida or Texas? She won't remain. So, yeah, there are a lot of moving parts, but I love it. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, Angelique, you do such a great job. You're really known as sort of a leading international recruiting and placement professional. When we think about the clients, we think about the healthcare providers or the hospitals. You work with some of the most prestigious names in the industry, of course. What's that conversation sound like when they reach out to you, Angelique? Do they say, hey, we need a particular type of a nurse with a particular type of background, with this particular specialty, whether it's ICU or surgery or something else, and then you go out and find that nurse? Or do you already have your list of nurses that are sort of ready, willing, and able to come and do the job?
Both. So we are recruiting, identifying on a daily basis. On an average, I speak to anywhere between 3 to 8 new individuals on a daily basis. So that's a lot. And we sponsored typically, for example, one client sponsors maybe 20 to 30 nurses a month. So not only do we have individuals already in the pipeline that upon arrival can be deployed to a specific hospital within a specific clinical area, but we are also constantly addressing job orders. And depending upon the level of skill required, for example, my search for the first assist for a cardiothoracic surgeon is going to be very different than that for a medical surgical nurse in a general unit. So it's a combination of the two. And because we've been doing this now for it's almost 23 years, obviously we have a very large network. So if something very specific comes up that I think it requires a specific type of personality and skill set, I can broadcast it amongst the network and referrals come in.
Yeah, it's a great way to go after being in the business so long. One thing that really comes across, Angelique, during our phone call and during this interview, of course, is you're passionate about helping the healthcare candidates. I mean, you really want to make sure that matchmaking is correct, because when they get here, you want to make sure they have a great entrance into the hospital. You want to make sure that they're able to live in the community. You want to make sure that they get some friends and that they're understood from the environment or the country that they came from. Let's talk about that, because you have such a passion for that. It's really remarkable.
Anybody that is working with us to recruit international nurses are very sensitive to the acculturation process. They have programs in place that will assist the nurse in becoming immersed in their community, both at the workplace and in their neighborhood. And that's critical. And typically, I try to place nurses with the same group of nurses from a specific region or area, because If I already have an established group, I have an established support system. And when there are like-minded people around a new nurse, a new family that is just arriving, who have gone through the same thing as they are going through now, they've gone through it last year, the year before, 5 years ago, obviously it makes it so much easier for the new person arriving. But unfortunately, that's not the case in every situation. Somebody has to be a groundbreaker at some point, and I let those nurses know. And I have encountered some courageous souls who were willing to take that first step. And here they are still, 20 years later, and there's a large community that surrounds them. I have the privilege of working with the daughters and sons of nurses that arrived 10, 15, 20 years ago, whose children are now nurses. And it's great. Yeah.
I love it, Angelique. It's really powerful, especially for someone coming from a different country. They get inserted into a healthcare unit, into a hospital, and then you give them the opportunity to really breathe and expand and sort of nurture them along the way. And you put them in the best position to win, to have a long-term opportunity with the people that you place them with. Let's talk about that a little bit. When you take someone from a foreign country and you bring them here and then they go into a hospital, how long do they typically stay at the hospital? What's your goal? Do you want them there for the rest of their life? Is it a 2-year commitment, a 1-year commitment? What does that look like?
So obviously, I want them there forever. That's not realistic. Although I have nurses that arrived in 2000, 2001, 2002 that are still with the very same sponsoring employer. They've gone on to obtain their nurse practitioner licenses or become CRNAs. I have a young lady actually who just obtained her PhD, and she arrived as a BSN. So the minimum commitment that I expect a nurse to give so that the client receives a return on the investment that they have made in that person with regard to the education and the costs for the immigration and the licensing, which is not something to sneeze at, is a minimum of 24 to 30 months, depending upon the clinical area. And also depending upon where the nurse is coming from. There are certain areas in the world where the hospitals work on the American model, and the acclimation to the U.S. hospital is almost seamless. They speak English. They use the same electronic medical records, equipment, procedures. Everything is the same. Many of them are Joint Commission International certified. We've got a couple of hospitals overseas that have magnet designation. So those hospitals, the nurses coming from those organizations, are pretty much going to seamlessly be able to integrate and orient into their new workplace environment. Nurses that are coming from a country that does not resemble our healthcare delivery system in any way are going to require a minimum, conservatively speaking, 4 to 6 months before they are truly 100% independent, quote unquote. Now, that does not mean that within that time period, they aren't able to function efficiently and effectively, but a resource person needs to be available to them, a preceptor, an educator of some sort. So for the hospital's benefit, I feel that in a situation like that, the first 6 months being counted as orientation and acclimation time, and then the hospital would have a nurse, a fully independently functioning nurse for at least 2 years.
Yeah, that makes sense. If I'm thinking about it, you have a nurse coming over from a foreign country, you're placing them in one of your, prestigious clients' hospitals, let's say in this example. Where do they land? What's the housing look like? How do they find housing? Is it already found for them before they get there? Does the hospital help with that, or do you help with that? How does all that work?
All of the above. And again, it depends upon, do they have family here already? Are they coming to stay with a sister for a period of time? Generally speaking, we identify the housing for them. We make all the initial arrangements. Over the years, we've standardized the list. They get to check off what they want from IKEA or wherever, and the groceries they want. And when they get picked up at the airport after who knows how many hours of travel with their little ones, they can go to their apartments, their beds are ready, their kitchen is ready, and they get to rest. So we do most of the times, we are the ones identifying the housing, taking the initial leases, making sure that it's either close enough to the hospital for them to Uber at a reasonable price, or that there is reliable and efficient public transportation.
Wow.
I've also had hospitals, more rural hospitals, who've actually set up like little van shuttles. I had one situation with a hospital in Westchester where I actually rented an entire apartment building, 12 units, because everyone arrived within a 1-week period. And they had a shuttle bus because on the 12-hour shifts, that's easy to do.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I call it a white glove service. When we think about the nurses, Angelique, coming over, let's talk a little bit about either licensing or certification from their country to the U.S. Is it similar? Do they have to take a certification in the U.S.? How does all that work?
They must pass the U.S. registered nurse licensing exam that everybody that wants to be a nurse in the United States has to take. And that's called the NCLEX RN. And before they're even granted permission to take the exam, there is an organization called the CGFNS, which is the Commission for Graduates of Foreign Nursing Students. And for most of the states, they are tasked with the duty of evaluating their primary and college education. So in the United States, if you want to become a nurse, you must first complete grades 1 through 12, and then at minimum a 2-year degree, if not a 4-year degree. In most New York State, it's now a 4-year degree. So the CGFNS, and there are some other credentialing bodies as well, but CGFNS was the first. They're designated by the USCIS to certify an extra piece, which is the language proficiency, and some other pieces under what's called the visa screen. However, before you're granted permission by a board of nursing, whether it be New York, New Jersey, Florida, any of the states, your education must be evaluated and certified as being the equivalent of what is required in the United States. So it's the K 1 through 12 plus 2 or 4 years. Then the degree and the nursing program itself is very carefully evaluated. It is a course by course evaluation, along with the clinical hours that they perform, that they rotate through each clinical area, just like we do here in the United States. Nurses from some countries do need to take additional classes first before they're allowed to take the RN exam. But until they've passed the RN exam, we cannot initiate any immigration work, because that's one of the minimum requirements of the USCIS, is that they have passed the RN exam. So when somebody comes to me, they have either already passed the RN exam in the United States, or they're very close to taking it. They've already been studying and prepping and or have a date, what's called the authorization to test.
Very interesting, Angelique. Let's talk about the state of the union of nurses. I'll give you time to make like a State of the Union address. Where are we at? Are we just short on nurses? Do we need more nurses in the pipeline? Are we able to backfill nurses? And especially with the type of nurses that you work with, which are, highly evolved, very important, technical nurses for specific areas of the hospital. Where are we at? Give us a State of the Union of nurses in general.
Okay, so the entire world is short-staffed. The entire world is experiencing a shortage of nurses. Fortunately, everybody still wants to come to America. So in that regard, we are very lucky. Right now, of course, because of the pandemic, many nurses have accelerated their retirement timelines. Many people have left the field, and not just in nursing, because of the burnout. So the projected shortages, which you can find on the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, has only been accelerated and amplified. And right now, if we had enough classroom space and we had enough teachers to create more nursing programs, we still wouldn't be able to graduate enough nurses in the next 5 years to address just the shortfall that's resulted from the pandemic. So, and international nursing has always been, we've had nursing shortages routinely. We had the nursing shortage of the 60s. We had the nursing shortage of the 80s. We had the nursing shortage of the 90s. Now we have this nursing shortage. This one is obviously very different than the previous ones, but international nurses contribute greatly to that relief, and they are honored and delighted to be given the opportunity to come here to further their careers, to advance professionally, financially, for their children's future, to help their families back home. So the American dream is still very much alive and well. It's very different from what it was when I arrived, and it has its own unique challenges. However, if you work, you just do what you got to do, it's there. And I see it time and time and time again.
It's so powerful. What a great way to end the show. Before I go, though, I do have to ask you about entrepreneurship, because we do have some younger entrepreneurs watching the show, Angelique. And of course, you know, sometimes they hit a pothole in the road. Sometimes they hit a roadblock, or they hit a wall they can't get through. I'm hoping, based on your numerous years of experience building one of the leaders in the space with One Call Staffing, you could share for the younger entrepreneurs watching the show what it takes to get through a tough time as an entrepreneur and keep on pushing.
Well, it's interesting you asked me that, because when I had started other companies before One Call Staffing, little dabbly things. I was in the dental industry for some time. That's what put me through nursing school. And I was consulting, and my company was called Practice Perfect, but I dabbled. So when I started One Call Staffing, my nose was to the grindstone. I was a single parent. It was do or die. And there are times that I thought I was going to die. And the one thing that rang true was that adage about the 3 years, almost to the day. It's that 3 years is definitely the make or break. And if you've made it to that point, then you're going to be fine. And if you believe in what you are doing and you are providing a service, I don't see how you can fail, except if you allow inappropriate conversations to run between your ears. Because at the end of the day, we are responsible for creating our own success. And as you just keep believing in yourself, know that you were brought to this point for a reason. Things do not happen by accident. And if you are passionate with what you do, you believe in what you do, and you know that you are doing something that will benefit somebody else, the natural outcome will be that you also will benefit. You just gotta hang in there and stay out of your head.
I love it, Angelique. You're such a light onto the world. I mean, for the entrepreneurs watching the show, rewind what Angelique just said, stay out of your head. I mean, it's fantastic. And look at that 3-year mark. Listen, I know you're talking to 6, 8, 10 candidates a day. You've got this burgeoning business. Congratulations. I wanted to thank you so much for cutting some time out today and bringing us inside One Call Staffing and what you do. It's a fascinating niche that you've built, and you really become the worldwide leading expert in the field. So, Angelique, I wanted to thank you so much for coming on the DotCom Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series today.
And thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.